So again, the first plenary panel had to do with the current state of the art of collaboration. We've assembled what I think is an outstanding panel of colleagues, again, from the research community, from the instructional technology community, from across the corporate sector to help us look into the crystal ball and to lead us through that conversation, Casey Green.
I need to do a little bit of housekeeping before we begin with the panel. First, an editorial correction. I referenced the statement of the president of Washington State University. I didn't get it quite right. His quip was that Elson Floyd, it's culture eats strategy every day. I want to get that on the record. Second, Larry Johnson is still here for about an hour. Larry was delighted that about 24 of you have friended him in the last 35 minutes. He's asked me to announce that he really takes this challenge. This is the Larry Johnson Challenge. So this is kind of like a public broadcasting or NPR pledge-a-thon. We'd like to get about 75 people to friend Larry in the next hour. He promised that he will sign all your programs. If you get 10 friends to friend Larry, he will give you a toaster, all right? And it escalates up, but we don't know what the rest of the prizes are. So, and anyhow, let's go on to the panel. I opened the panel this morning with saying that we're going to try to at least provide a very broad map of the state of collaborative technology, focusing primarily on what goes on in higher education with students, with faculty members, with researchers, and with research projects. And we got into a little bit of the conversation. Is some of this about code? Is it about culture? About the interaction between the two, recognizing both are very important? And the conversation was, what are we doing well and how far have we come given the time and the technologies that have emerged over the past several decades? So the challenge, as Lev mentioned, is our closing panel. Then I'll introduce them in a moment, is we want to look ahead. Again, looking on these issues of code, on culture, where are the opportunities for us to do better, and what will be some of the things that take us to that next plateau, to those next levels. As I did this morning, I want to do some very quick introductions. So I'm going to do this alphabetically. Lara Oerter is the vice president at Blackboard, and her responsibilities include product strategy for the company's global e-learning business. Bill St. Arnaud is the Chief Research Officer for CANARIE, Canada's Advanced Internet Development Organization. Bill's been responsible for the coordination and implementation of Canada's Next Generation Optical Internet Initiative, and he's currently working with environmental scientists, and we'll hear a little bit more about that as we move forward in the conversation. Patty Sullivan to my left and your right, and that's a geographic, not a political statement, I think. I don't know. Patty is the Education Solutions Executive for IBM's global education industry, and her activities and responsibilities include IBM's activities in both K-12 and higher education in the US and North America and worldwide. Barbara Truman at the far side of the stage is the Director of Course Development and Web Services. I don't know how you pronounce that. Is there a word for that? CWS, so it's okay. CWS, the Division of Information Technology and Resources at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. CWS is the learning technology units for the university, responsible for developing strategic and online initiatives for faculty development, multimedia production. And finally, Andrew Yu, who packed the room early this morning in a pre-conference, is the mobile platform manager and architect for information services and technology at MIT, and he's initiated and completed the MIT Mobile Web project that led to the effort for an open source project. I want to frame this one other way as well, because we're going to ask the panel to make some very bold predictions, or at least I'm going to try to encourage them to, with this caution. The processes and uses of information technology are undergoing unprecedented technological revolution. How often have you heard that in so many ways? Nowhere is this more true in the world of education. We're going to have online tutors as responsive as essentially the Greek philosophers. This is 40 years old, folks. October, it's 1966 in Scientific American, so it is a matter that our reach still falls short of our grasp. The second, I would just again to anchor, because there is a video archive of this, folks. It'll come back to bite somebody at some point along the way, perhaps me. A sense of deja vu that if you substitute technology for television, dominates American life and manners. The lackluster record of the educational uses of television, or we could say technology, in part is due to faculty resistance. There's a lot of stuff lying around. Here we go. Academic indifference to this enormously powerful medium is doubly incomprehensible when we think that today's college students are the first generation of to come of age with technology, with television. The speaker here is George Bonham in Change Magazine in 1972. He's talking about many of us with gray or thinning hairs, the baby boomers who came of age with television. Substitute technology, and this statement is as accurate for the students that many of us have in our classrooms today, regardless of age. While others have argued that the digital generation is defined by age, I would argue it's defined by expectations, and the expectations, whether our students are 18 or 57, is that they live in a wired environment driven by consumer experience. So with that, panel, so now you know the cautionary statement is going to come back to bite you. Bill, you're up. Your portfolio is both the design of networks, trying to anticipate where the technology is going, and you've also been working with environmental scientists who in many ways are among the most collaborative of researchers, given the databases, given a variety of expertise and the technologies that they have to use. What can you draw out from that experience that tells us about where we're going with collaborative technologies?
Well, I think, first of all, I want to congratulate Lev and his team for this great conference and all these discussions about collaborative technologies. I think there's going to be one very critical new area which we haven't really touched upon, where collaborative technologies will really play a critical role, and that is addressing the challenge of climate change. This may seem odd to you, but right now in Washington, Obama's got a very powerful science team. John Holdren, of course, the National Science Advisor, Stephen Chu at DOE, and Browning, and Lubchenco, and so forth. And I think you're going to see a very strong push from this administration on addressing the most serious challenge facing this planet. As John Holdren says, it's a misnomer to say climate change or global warming. It's global climatic disruption. So hopefully with Waxman and his committee, we'll get a cap and trade bill through the United States, and that's going to have major implications for universities, for educational institutions, and so forth. As you know, the EPA is going through a process to label carbon as a pollutant. And when that happens, any institution that produces over 25,000 tons of CO2 will be regulated and come under the proposed cap and trade system. That will include most research universities in the United States. So the impact upon that will be the universities will have to reduce their carbon footprint, and they'll have to undertake steps in all sorts of activities, including the power plant and ICT and so forth, to find ways to meet the EPA guidelines or the Waxman bill. Already in Canada, some of our governments have mandated carbon neutrality upon universities. For example, in British Columbia, all universities must be carbon neutral next year, and this is causing panic in the streets. If the universities do not become carbon neutral, they must pay money into a fund, research dollars, support dollars, and so forth. In the United Kingdom, the government's already said all universities and research their funding will be based on their carbon footprint. So these are trends you're starting to see happen around the rest of the world, and I think are going to come big time in the United States. And it'll really have a serious impact on institutions like Case Western, where most of your power comes from coal-fired electric plants. So where does collaborative technologies play? Well, I think they really have an important role in helping us reduce that footprint. This morning, at a press conference, Amazon announced with Case Western this pilot to use the Kindle DX to replace textbooks for students. And this is a great example of how we can use this type of technology. A single textbook produces 5 pounds of CO2. Babcock School of Business, which has 160 students, estimates that textbooks alone produce 45 tons of CO2 at that university. That's forgetting all the paper, transportation, heat, and everything else, just the textbooks. So by using these collaborative technologies, we can help reduce that impact from textbooks. But these technologies and distance learning and collaboration, I think, will also help in reducing travel, reducing all sorts of environmental impact costs in terms of paper and so on. And to me, this could be a really critical driver and could be really pushed forward when cap and trade comes into legislation, because the cost of electricity could almost triple. And so there would be a real push from institutions like this, from your president on down, to say we've got to find new solutions. We cannot use the old techniques for education because of their carbon impact. So I applaud you on this initiative. I think there's a really, when you start looking at this in terms of carbon as well, that many of the costs of this technology can also be covered by your reduction in carbon costs. There's what's called carbon trading. There'll be permit trading under cap and trade. And so there's another pool of money now becoming available that will support technologies that enable collaboration at a distance, to reduce that travel, reduce use of physical goods, and so forth. And I think they also can play an important role as a stimulus to the students and faculty to reduce their own personal carbon footprint, something we call G-commerce instead of e-commerce, is to use collaborative technologies and tools, things like the Kindle, virtual worlds, and so forth, to reward people in their daily lives for them to do something that reduces their carbon footprint, like taking the bus to school, or a tax on travel for faculty, and so on and so forth. So I really congratulate what you're all doing in this area. I think it's going to play a vital role, of course, in education and research, but could be one of the more fundamental tools in addressing the biggest challenge facing this planet.
Patty, I want to turn to tools, if I may. IBM has a long history of supporting education that predates its entry into the computer business. Tom Watson Sr., according to some corporate histories I've read, actually used to take business machines, at the time it was International Business Machines, drop them at the back docks at Columbia University and see what the academics would do and how they might find value with this. What's next in the kinds of things that IBM is currently bringing or will be bringing that we'll be able to play with, which will sort of help bring value and an uncharted path into some of these collaborative areas for us?
Well, the nice thing, Casey, is that everyone in the room here has had somewhat of a preview to what's coming from IBM research. And I was looking for Larry out there. Is he there?
He's signing Horizon reports.
He's signing books out there. Much of what you saw, or quite a bit of what you saw in Larry's presentation at lunch today, came from IBM. Several of the examples that he used. In fact, we have a number of individuals at our Almaden Research Center that share the outlook of the future of technology and the tools with the New Media Consortium, and we're pleased to collaborate with him. And I was a little disheartened to find out that they actually let him touch the scanning electron microscope. They never let me touch it. I only get to read about them. He actually gets to move atoms.
Larry's actually been turned into a superhero because of that. Exactly. Movie will be out in summer 2012.
Exactly.
Super Tweed. So.
Super Tweed. So every year, for the past 25 years, IBM has created what we call our Global Technology Outlook. And that is an opportunity to look at not only what's happening within our own IBM research organizations, but also what's happening out there in the broader IT world. And some of you may have participated in various discussions about this. Some of you may have seen Global Technology Outlook presentations in the past. And in preparation for the session, I decided to go back and look at, well, what were we saying 25 years ago and last year, et cetera. And it is interesting that it was probably about a decade ago that we were talking about collaborative technologies and dynamic web and some of the dynamic infrastructure. But only last year, there was quite a bit of focus on some of the specific social networking technologies that we've seen evolve over the last year. And what I found particularly of interest by its exclusion was that there wasn't so much of a focus on collaborative technologies this year. 2009's report just came out. I would have expected a significant part of that to talk about collaborative technologies. And in fact, it's not so much that they're passé, but they're here, and they're here to stay, and they're fairly well understood. Now the focus is, how do you take those technologies, how do you take those tools and turn them into results, into outcomes? So what we're focused on is taking data and turning it into smarter decision making, smarter outcomes, being able to mash up data from multiple sources and being able to use new forms of analytics on it such that you can get an outcome that will be improved overall for society, for an individual, et cetera. Looking at crowd wisdom, right? How do you extract wisdom from a crowd? And certainly Wikipedia is an example of that. And the comment about the H1N1 virus, having the most current data on Wikipedia, was very interesting to me, because the crowd and what we're all experiencing, both from the experts as well as the individuals who may be afflicted by the flu virus, are the ones who have the best knowledge of it.
Okay, that helps.
Good.
I want to build on some of that. Lara, learning management systems have effectively become ubiquitous across higher education. We didn't have them effectively 12, 13 years ago. They are certainly, every campus has now got one. Data from campus computing say about 50, 60% of classes are using an LMS in one form or another. And I think yet when most of us think about an LMS, we know there's a lot of collaborative technology in any of the systems, but it still seems to be kind of a one-to-one. faculty member pouring something out, student does something. If the system goes down, whatever it is and however it is, we know it's important because people will rip out your throat if it happens during finals week.
Oh, yes.
What's the direction of collaboration within these systems, other than being kind of a distribution mechanism in some way, which is and a way to help faculty get stuff on the web, which in some ways is how they started?
So I think that the direction is really, the reality, as you mentioned, is there are a lot of collaborative tools already in many of these systems, and the reality is really working with faculty and instructors to move their use of the technologies from, hey, I'm going to post my syllabus, or students, here are your grades, to building collaborative opportunities and activities in discipline-specific ways that really drive that collaboration through the curriculum. I thought it was really interesting to listen to this morning's opening panel as we heard about the redesign of the curriculum at the new medical school and the way that they've really shifted that towards problem-based learning. And I think to go back to your earlier theme of, is it the culture or is it the technology? It's more about the culture that we need to really focus on right now in terms of really shifting the way that faculty think about teaching. I think student expectations are absolutely there. And I think we're seeing more and more, I see more and more as I talk to our clients and other institutions, the expectations and the pressures that students are putting on their teachers, on their faculty to use collaborative technologies, even in pretty straightforward ways, is mounting. And I think faculty are starting to get that, right? And starting to change their behaviors and the way that they approach their teaching. In big ways when you redesign curriculum, and in very small ways, just as new faculty come into the teaching sphere and really have their students set that level of expectation. In terms of how the technology is really changing, I think that Joan from Cornell talked a little bit this morning about this need to have an evolving and a more lightweight framework so that you can plug different things together. You know, in the past couple of years, it was plugging in the wikis and the social bookmarking tools and the group collaboration tools. You know, in the next 2 or 3 years, those are now pretty standard, and those are going to evolve back into the platform, and it's going to be plugging in things that we can't even possibly think of today. And so one of the things that tells us in terms of it, as I drive the product strategy for Blackboard, and I work with many institutions, including those in this room, is really to think about how can we have the platform be something that is stable and reliable and robust and takes care of balancing all those privacy issues and FERPA issues and data issues and authentication issues, but still allow you to pull in any tool that you might want. So that we've been doing some really interesting collaboration with Chuck Severance, who I'm sure many of you know of from the IMS and who was one of the original Sakai architects in this idea through the new LTI framework through the IMS to be able to pull in individual tools from different environments, whether it's the Sakai discussion board or some kind of Twitter tool or some other kind of collaborative tool, and pull those in and out of the learning management and teaching and learning platform environment so that you have a lot of choice and flexibility as an individual instructor, an individual faculty member, but you still don't have to worry about all of those security and data and authentication issues, because unfortunately as institutions, we really still have to worry about those things. It can't be the kind of Wild West for 80% of the courses that we teach.
Barbara, I want to turn to you because you're in the middle of choice, option, responsibility, and like your counterparts in a lot of other institutions, we still know that faculty are befuddled by a lot of this stuff. You work with people to help them develop stuff, and you work with people to help them understand what the stuff does in the middle of in some sense, the culture, adding value. Where are some of the next challenges as this moves forward?
I think with the plethora of choices that are out there now, between what we have on campus and between what's in the cloud, we have to help faculty prioritize where they will spend their time and effort to maximize their students' learning experience. That's probably one of the biggest challenges we have, because some campuses, not Case Western necessarily, but some campuses are very decentralized, and the attempt to change the culture has to come from clear leadership. And if we're going to lead in sorting out these technologies for our faculty and our students, we have to build trust. If we build trust, we have to be able to experiment and fail in a safe way, but learn from those experiences.
Okay. Which takes us to Andrew in mobility. I was intrigued by one of the slides that Larry Johnson showed earlier, that I'm mindful of the report just after the Second World War, need for maybe 5 computers ever. We know how quickly that went away. IBM's prediction that maybe there would be 180,000 PCs sold over the lifetime run of the IBM PC. It turned out they were pushing out 180,000 a month at one point, toward about 2-3 years afterwards. Prediction of 900,000 cell phones would be the peak at some point, and of course the number we're doing 1.3 billion or 2 billion a year. It's this whole, it accelerates, it goes quickly. Mobility is the new environment in many ways. We know students are using these things, whatever these things are, whether they're notebook computers, netbooks, phones, whatever the next level of devices are. You're in the middle of this. You actually design the tools at MIT. What do we need to understand about that environment as we talk about collaboration or access to collaborative environments?
So mobility, as I presented this morning, is a really complex environment. And whether we like it or not, there's a tremendous number of competitors out there. You know, Apple iPhone certainly came out of nowhere a couple of years ago. Actually, it's been less than 2 years since the introduction of the original iPhone. And it's been less than about 10 months since the ability for the developers to actually start developing real applications on the iPhone. Of course, Windows Mobile, the Symbians, they've been around. Android was introduced. The first Android device came out back in November, December timeframe. Palm is actually sort of doing a rebirth and coming up with the Palm Pre in the summer. So it's not the world of the regular computers where you have Windows, Macs, and Linux. It's the world where you have at least 6 different platforms that are available.
It's kind of a throwback to the old days of computing in one sense, very different operating systems.
Right.
The browser brought us an integrated environment, and all of a sudden we're seeing the scattering again with mobility.
Yeah, and on top of that, you have the carriers. So a lot of those exclusivity deals, namely AT&T with iPhone, Palm Pre with
Or even
Sprint.
just the networks, 3G.
Absolutely, and all these complex challenges that we face. So when somebody comes in and say, hey, I have this device from this carrier, and can you make this work for us within the educational environment, the education institutions have to really look at that very carefully. So that's the bad news. There's this complexity, and it's going to continue on. I think we have 4 carriers in the U.S. market, and certainly that number of carriers may reduce, but there will be new 4th-generation network that's coming out with different flavors. So there's LTE, and then there's a WiMAX. So all these alphabet soup that we're living under, to the end users, they don't really care. Right? So the bottom line is, all they want to care about is, how can I collaborate with my peers? How can I use these as an effective tool to study and to make some productive usage out of these tools? So we are sort of living under this umbrella of this really complex mobile world, but yet have to come up with a solution that is really straightforward and simple to use for the end users. And I think that's the huge challenge that we have moving towards the future.
Does mobility push us faster into the cloud? Because we all have handsets in a way that have different systems and different networks?
Yep, absolutely. So with these devices, I think the projection is that in the US market, probably somewhere between 20 to 25% of all the cell phone users are using smartphones today. That probably number is going to go up to 40, 50% within the next couple of years. Potentially, it's going to go up to even higher in the next 5 years. So you have basically a computer with a camera, with a GPS, with all these accelerometer, everything that's a Swiss Army knife built in that you have 24/7 with you at all times. So these types of technological innovation is something that's going to be there for,
Barbara, you're on the developing end of that problem because you've got students, you've got faculty, you've got staff, whether it's your center or the larger RT environment at Central Florida, which is like a lot of others. You try to have command and control. We recognize we don't.
Right.
What do you do with that? If somebody says, I want this on my environment, and the browser in and of itself is not sufficient.
Well, I think part of what we'll have to do as a strategy is to look for the wisdom of the crowds, whether or not they're in the clouds or not. So the fact that Andrew's project, what he's working on, he is producing that in an open source environment. It's going to make life a lot easier for us to be able to follow that lead.
Yeah. Bill, I want to come back to the issue of collaboration among the scientists. There's the great story that begins the book about Wikipedia, about the Canadian company that put all its data out as opposed to being proprietary about it. You can see some analogies probably in cancer research, certainly in environmental science. What lessons do we take away from that as we think about collaboration among researchers first, and then changing that culture as opposed to who's rushing to get the prize but rushing to share the resource?
Well, I think in the science community, that culture is rapidly changing with the acceptance of open data, open courseware, as we've seen from MIT and other institutions and so forth. It's slow. I think it will probably be a generational change. But I suspect we had a request from one of our large research projects, Neptune, which is a large undersea project, and they need thousands and thousands of eyes. They say we cannot restrict our research just to people with PhDs. We have to engage with the community to help us. So this crowdsourcing and so forth, to count a whole bunch of very dim fish on screens is an important aspect of this. We're also seeing this in astronomy. There's a number of projects where astronomers are going out engaging with schools and the public to help them complete their science in something we call citizen science. So we're seeing this collaboration, I think, largely between scientists and citizens through these tools, and eventually I think maybe, we'll see it between researchers themselves.
And Patty, how does this stuff get out of the labs? I mean, IBM obviously has an interest in, as other companies do. You want to brand it, you want to say we own it, you want to bring it to market after the investment for both corporate communities, research communities, and academic communities. How fast does it move? I mean, we saw some of that with Larry's presentation today. And sometimes it's not even branded. We just know it's there. It seems to exist in the cloud.
Well, and an even more challenging question is, how much do you contribute to an open source community, and how much do you hold proprietary? And that is a constantly evolving decision. Much of our software coming out now, we are contributing directly to many of the open consortia for software to get it out faster, and to get adoption faster, and to get interoperability at a more rapid rate. So how
it seems like there's this kind of new porous relationship among corporations. Lara, I know that Blackboard has in some ways become porous in terms of, you mentioned Sakai, whether it's détente or porous or transparency. Patty, you mentioned the same thing. Barbara, you alluded to these issues as well. I mean, how important it is, whether the right term is being porous or being transparent, or going to be as part of the code that fosters us or takes us to those next levels of collaboration. Let me begin with Patty.
Sure, I just like to look at other industries. And if you still had to go to only your bank's ATMs, how happy would you be, right? And that's the world of proprietary nature of services around education, I think is ending. And it's got to be an open environment where individuals can get, one of the speakers this morning spoke about it, and you have to be able to get piece parts that you need when you need them. You need a personalized learning path. You need to be able to create your learning continuum, right, personally, and be able to work with a number of different institutions and pull that together. And the only way that'll happen was open standards.
Lara, again, transparency, porous, things being porous for whether it's Blackboard, IBM, Adobe, who was with us earlier in the opening panel. Is that part of the new mantra, even among proprietary providers, that we have to look forward to?
Without a doubt, absolutely. And it's really a question of not as pressure and expectations from our clients are continuing to rise, and the broader community is continuing to rise, there's no way that we can meet all of those expectations and provide the tools that everyone wants. And so we're really focused on how do we provide the tools for the 80% and then provide all the APIs and all the interfaces and all the development community support so that institutions then can take those and tweak those and modify them for their particular expectations and needs and environments. And I think it's absolutely part of the path going forward.
You mentioned 80%, Lara. Barbara, I'm thinking about the other reference to 80%. Too often the technology, we think about the 80-20 rule. 80% of the activities and 20% of the functionality. I'm thinking again about the collaborative tools that are ubiquitous to a lot of the technologies that we use. Acrobat, Microsoft Office, learning management systems. Again, you're in the middle of this. Sort of, how do you lead, cajole, kick students and faculty to actually understand that those tools are there, and those tools are not a threat, but they're a resource?
Our jobs will be easier when we have a diverse environment where we have fewer single points of failure in our systems. That will be easier. Then, From there, it goes back to what kind of professional development opportunities do we provide for our faculty on a regular, ongoing basis. This conference is a terrific example for the CASE faculty who have the opportunity to come and learn from an event like this. I am very envious.
I'm struck by your comment about single points of failure, because in one sense, Andrew laid out a world for us that, at least before mobility, lots of different platform providers, different network standards, both in the US and overseas. Larry's story about getting to Japan and he had a 3G phone that wasn't sophisticated enough. Single point of failure, in fact, it's getting, in some ways, it seems like we've hit the dip and then we're going back up in terms of complexity, specifically because of mobility. Andrew? When's it going to get simple again?
Well,
next week?
Well, so it's going to get simpler, and I promise you that.
When? You're on camera now, so we're going to come back.
Right. So one of the things that we've done, especially with the MIT Mobile Web, is that we really try to stick to the standards. So HTML5 standard, as an example, that allows you to have certain capabilities on the device, such as using the caching capability directly built into these devices. And of course, a lot of the CSS that's sort of industry standard today. So once we built it for the iPhone, that actually works on the Android, that also will work on the Palm Pre. So by sticking to the standards, basically we can develop tool sets that can be spread across those vendors that are going to follow those standards. Now, this is not to say that every other vendor will actually come up with a device with a browser that is capable of handling those standards the right way, and there will be some variations, obviously. But I think we're sort of a firm believer in the fact that as long as you stick to the standards, then there will be solution sets that you can actually spread across.
And Bill, what about high-speed networks? As a civilian, it would seem to me that the complexity that Andrew has mapped for us in terms of mobility has not been part of the design of high-speed networks, or am I misinformed?
Well, yeah, I think you're right. I think there will have to be some adjustments, particularly in the research networks and how we integrate with wireless networks and the global internet, because we're seeing these dynamics, particularly with clouds, and the new interface to the computing is going to be the handheld device. I'm fully convinced of that. And where your applications, your data will reside is in the cloud somewhere. So we have to make sure we have that high-speed connectivity, that users don't suffer latency or congestion because of these new architectures, new applications.
I want to give you each a chance to respond to the question I posed to the panel this morning. Single most important issue, is it code or is it going to be culture as we think about the next plateau, it's not a platform, of moving forward with new technologies and new expectations? Patty?
I have to say, I'm thinking of my daughter's generation who just graduated from college, and she's got no problem with the culture of technology.
I'm thinking about the rest of us.
I think it's the rest of us that have a problem, but it's the culture.
Okay. Andrew, code or culture? Culture. Lara?
Culture.
Neither. I say the biggest challenge facing us is climate change. It's
climate
going to change everything.
So metaphorically or otherwise, if we heat things up, we're going to be forced to react to it.
Just to put in context, the latest climate predictions is the global climate's warm up by 5 to 5.1 degrees by 2100. The last ice age, the Earth was 6 degrees colder, and we were under 3 miles of ice sitting right here. Okay. Think what that's going to happen in the opposite direction.
And hopefully the climate crisis will help build our culture.
Okay. What aren't we talking about in this conversation looking forward, other than climate change? That one's firmly staked for us, Bill. But so often in these environments, we do a little, and we did. This panel had a conference call before we got here. We kind of put a broad theme out, and the conversation goes where it goes. What issue are we missing that we didn't touch on as we thought about this conversation today, last week, and that you've heard emerged in the hallway conversations and the breakout sessions? I'm going to start, Barbara.
There are two things. I had not thought as much about collaboration literacy in terms of how to empower faculty and students such that would enable them in all their endeavors. And the second one is how e-portfolios will evolve over time such that they are not an artifact of our educational or career experience, but they are more part of our life.
Bill, we know climate change. It may be a distant second, but what else are we missing in this conversation?
Well, I don't know if we're missing something. I first heard the expression e-portfolios for the first time today, and I'm quite excited by the concept. And I think that will build a framework, I think, for a lot of interesting new applications and services.
Lara, what are we missing in the conversation?
I think we need to be talking more about the broader K-20 continuum and not just what happens with students when they're at these institutions, these elite research institutions, but what is happening through the whole education pipeline, how we're meeting expectations of kids, how higher education is really living up to its responsibility to the K-12 districts and the K-12 schools and the K-12 teachers to really prepare those kids as they move into the higher education environment so that they can be successful.
Well, and it's not just kids. We've seen this huge surge in enrollments in community colleges. And I think it's fair to say community colleges in some ways are the canaries in the coal mine for higher education in terms of very quick shifts and having to be responsive faster and quicker than other segments. Just because something happens and people show up in January, they show up in March, midterm, as opposed to waiting for the traditional cycle beginning in September. Andrew, what are we missing in the conversation?
From the mobile perspective, I think it's the general policies. A lot of people actually ask me about, do we allow students to actually carry this into the classroom? Initially it was the phone, you don't want the phones to go off. And then it was the text messaging. Then now you have the ability to look up anything on the web. And so it's sort of become a ubiquitous device that allows, ceaseless access to information. And from the higher education perspective, how do we embrace that? How do we actually provide the proper policy and the guidelines so that we can effectively use this as an educational tool rather than a way to do instant messaging?
Patty, what are we missing?
Every one of you prompted a thought in my mind because
you got to pick one. The rest of it goes to Second Life.
I would challenge this entire community to focus, hopefully next year, really truly bring forth how does it change learning? What are the outcomes? How does it change the way we behave? And to really be able to communicate the efficacy of some of this technology. I know it's a major issue in the industry as a whole, but I didn't hear it. I heard people give a nod to outcomes, but I didn't hear any results.
Okay, good point. We want to open it up. We've got a few moments for a couple of questions. If there are any in the audience, going once. Over in the corner, please. If you would, again, as we asked earlier, please identify yourself and your organizational affiliation.
Marv Schwartz with CASE. One of the things I think you missed is how privacy and security concerns play with collaboration.
Good point. Quick comment from any members of the panel, or just are we in agreement? Okay. What becomes very interesting is the difference that generations have about the notion of privacy. We've seen lots of comments about that in a lot of different contexts, that younger people are in some ways abandoning privacy, and many of us who are a little older are far more protective of it, in some interesting ways. But it's a good and valid point. Other comment, please, on this side of the room.
Marguerite Schmitter, I'm the coordinator for the e-business management program at Cuyahoga Community College. Go to your colleges. I went to a conference last week where they did address the privacy issue, and they talked about the fact that the coming generation, the new generation, like your daughter, who's just graduating from college, have a different concept of privacy than we do. That how they behave on the internet is very different from how our generations do. And the ethics that we bring to it are different from the way they see it.
So it kind of speaks again potentially to a user education issue. Okay? Culture. We've got time for one more question before I'm sorry. Some Second Life. My apologies. I can't see the screen. So, Sue, what are we hearing? What's going on the screen?
We have a question from Alton Bookmite, and he asks, how can we encourage faculty to use some of the new technologies? We've had a very interesting discussion in here about that.
We get the most challenging and long questions that come from the folks in Second Life. How do we change culture? How do we get faculty? Barbara, I'm going to give that one to you because you run a center. Yeah. So, what are the three things besides a cattle prod?
Incentives. Tools, toys, faculty development programs, attendance at conferences.
Isn't one of the biggest challenges for faculty also to help them understand that one, this stuff makes a difference? Because one of the biggest challenges, Patty alluded to this earlier, do we really have hard data about the impact? We have a lot of epiphany, we have a lot of aspirations. And the other part is also we can enable faculty. In other words, person in the classroom next to you can do this. I don't have the technology, whatever, the gene, the bug, the DNA. My colleague doesn't, I don't do it. How can I see myself doing this stuff?
Yes, I think that's part of our role on our campuses, is to figure out how to have the good relationships with our faculty and to have events and get them together so that they can see how accessible many of these technologies are, and they can hear the benefits of the learning outcomes.
Great, and actually that's a great way to end, talking about the benefit of learning outcomes. So with that, I want to thank our panel and thank all of you.